Hello everyone, I am Santiago Buenaventura and I'm going to talk about the press freedom against the cartel drugs in Mexico. And I will talk about first in the context of the drug cartels in Mexico, second, how the drug cartels affect the press freedom, third, the conflict against the journalism in the three last presidential periods in the Felipe Calderón, Enrique Peña Nieto, and Andrés Manuel López Obrador governments. Fourth, I will talk about the mechanisms of repression. And fifth, I will talk about reflections of this problem. But first, we need to ask, and that is how the drug cartels in Mexico censor the press freedom in this country. Now, I will talk about when the the cartel drugs take force in Mexico, that it was 40 years ago when the president in that time, Felipe Calderon, declares the war against the drug cartels. It starts a lot of cartel wars for dispute of territories to traffic the drugs and make extortions for this consequence. And we have a lot of group gangs and many power control of territories and regions in Mexico by the cartel drugs, and the creation of new cartels like the Jalisco cartel, that is one of the most important cartel in Mexico. And now this is a map of the situation of control in the by the Mexican cartels. The cartel de Sinaloa in 2010 were the most important, but with the creation of Jalisco cartel, they divide a territory. But Sinaloa cartel, although Chapo Guzman were captured that year in 2007, they control a lot of part of territory in Mexico, in the Gulf of Mexico, and the frontiers with United States that are strategical points to traffic the drugs and make another um, kind of illegal acts. When the drug cartel start to grow with the illegal acts, it starts the violence against press freedom in Mexico. A big problem in there, because since this century between the governments of Felipe Calderón until now and Manuel López Obrador, um, the violence against the press freedom in many regions of Mexico grow, and the main reason is because many journalists start to denounce the atrocities by the Mexican cartels and the way of um, censor the this press freedom again by the drug cartels is by many violent ways like intimidations, kidnappings, rape, extortion, and disappearing, and the murderers. And for this reason, in Mexico, it's so dangerous being journalism. So journalists prefer don't talk about the drug cartels because they afraid for their lives and security. The violence against press freedom in Mexico has been in most part of history. However, in the period to starts to grow is in the Felipe Calderon government when he declares the war to the drug cartels, and it makes a lot of violent consequence by war cartels that it affects directly the press freedom and journalism and medias in Mexico. And it, for example, is the 258 aggressions against journalism, were including the forced disappearing, trist, armed attacks, and against the media installations. But the important figure here is 60 journalists killed in the period of Felipe Calderon government between 2006 and 2012. In the Enrique Peña Nieto government, we have the most violent period against the press freedom and journalism in Mexico, because it is when the Sinaloa cartels and other cartels start to consolidate some strategical points and regions in Mexico, and the most season where they they traffic the drug to other countries. And for this reason, a lot of journalists died. It was the highest point where journalists dead. In totally were 47 journalists journalists were killed, and the most popular recognized were Javier Valdez, a journalist in Gato Pardo, and he were killed by the Sinaloa cartel when he denounced in the region of Sinaloa atrocities acts by a little criminal band and in charge of Sinaloa cartel. At the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the actual president of Mexico, um, the people think that the violence against journalism by the drug cartels were decreased, but um, it has a, a, a high figures of attacks against journalism, because he can't at the moment control the cartel wars in Mexico, although many capos in Mexico were captured, but in many regions are controlled by Mexican drug cartels in this period, until this moment at the 2020 in the government of López Obrador, 296 um, journalists and communication mediums were attacked with many ways like intimidation, threats, and other ways. And at the point and this and until these years, 16 journalists were killed. In this graphic, you can see the increase of the violence and murderers against the journalism. For example, in this period, where the the government of Vicente Fox in this period were not so high, the the kills against journalism. However, when Felipe Calderon declares the war against against the cartel wars, it starts to increase in these years. But in the period of Enrique Peña Nieto, the aggressions against journalism increase 100 to 29%, and in comparison of the Felipe Calderon government, and the most worrying point against the press freedom in the history of Mexico in Andrés Manuel López Obrador, it decreased a little bit, but is worrying the figure. The main mechanisms of repression against the press freedom and journalism in Mexico is a lot of things, but these are the mains. For example, is the intimidation, the tricks, the hazements, the physical attacks, informatic blocks or hacks attacks, and that it starts in the period of Enrique Peña Nieto and disproportionate use of public force, and that it means that the drug cartels is not just the main aggressor against the press freedom, and that it's to the public force and the state actors are involved because in Mexico are a lot of corruption in the regions, in the governments, in the police, and it affects and when the cartel drugs start to take control in the politic and they could extortion including the governors or police, and it creates a lot of corruption. And however, a worrying figure is that in these cases of attacks against journalism in Mexico, the 99% attacks are not punished and it stays in impunity totally. Finally, I want to make two reflections that are that the censor finished one thing in Mexico won't finish when the government put the ends of the cartel war. It finished when it ends in the corruption that affects by the cartel wars because the politics and police promotes these atrocities when they are part of the cartel drugs, and it's necessary to create a way to finish the drug cartels, not declaring the war because it demonstrates that it's so create a war and innocent people are dead and attacks the press freedom in Mexico.